Chapter 6 of NUR 202 is Genetics, Conception, and Fetal Development. You have 8 objectives for this chapter, which I'm going to let you read on your own. Genetic disease affects people of all ages, socioeconomic levels, and racial and ethnic backgrounds. There are well over 1,900 different tests currently available, but family history will likely be the single most cost-effective way to gain genetic information. You can see about this slide on page 124 in your books, expanded roles of nursing. We do a lot to help in genetics, but I think the next slide will clear that up a little more. Essential nursing competencies and curricula guidelines for genetics and genomics. We've already talked about a complete 3-generation family genome or family tree, including both sides of the family, and ethnicity is still the best test applicable in preconception care when planning for conception. The roles of the nurse include prenatal screening, like the PKU test, the little circles on the little piece of paper that we dropped from the heel blood, and testing by assisting a genetic specialist, newborn or metabolic screening of the newborn, palliative care of an infant with a life-threatening genetic condition, like in a medical daycare situation or at home, and the identification and care of individuals with genetic conditions who require specialized care during pregnancy. In genetic testing, there are 2 key findings, and I thought this was very interesting, that all humans are 99.9% identical on a DNA level. There are approximately 20,500 genes in the human genome. So the human genome is the complete set of instructions in the nucleus of each human cell. So how different are we? Really, how different are we? Not that different. On page 125, you can see about these genetic testings. And pharmacogenetics is the use of genetic information to individualize drug therapy for that patient. Gene therapy is the aim of gene therapy is to correct defective genes that are responsible for disease development, and they're making great strides in all of these scientific discoveries. Please refer to page 124 in your chapter for more on the ethical, legal, and social implications. Now we're going back to your biology class and your A&P class, where you might have learned about deoxyribonucleic acid, and it's a molecule that's composed of 2 polynucleotide chains that coil around each other to form a double helix, carrying genetic instructions for the development, functioning, growth, and reproduction of all known organisms and many viruses. A chromosome is a deoxyribonucleic acid molecule with part or all of the genetic material of an organism. Most chromosomes include packaging proteins which are aiding in the development of all the chromosomes. They bind to and condense the DNA molecule to prevent it from becoming an unmanageable tangle. In biology, a gene is a sequence of nucleotides in DNA and RNA that encodes the synthesis of the gene product, either RNA or protein. During gene expression, the DNA is first copied into an RNA, and so on and so forth. Y'all can read this in your book. Homologous chromosomes, except for the X and Y chromosome, have the same number and arrangement of genes. An autosome is any chromosome that is not a sex chromosome. We know that there are only two sex chromosomes, or they're called gametes or sex cells. Those are the X and the Y chromosomes. Women have two X, and a man has an X and a Y chromosome. So if he does not get the boy that he wanted, it's his fault. In genetics, the Loci cell is specific. It's a fixed portion or position on the chromosome where a particular gene or genetic marker is located. And an allele is a variant form of a given gene, meaning that it is one or of two more versions of the known mutation at the same place on the chromosome. Now, I know all of this is deep and over your heads. What I need you to remember about this is about the X and the Y chromosomes being separate from the rest of the chromosomes. And you need to see page 127 for all of these definitions before I bore you to death with this biology, because I'm not a biology teacher. Chromosomal abnormalities happen during cell division. Mitosis is the cell division throughout the body in every cell except the sex cell. The sex cell division is called meiosis, and that only happens when the X or the Y chromosome is splitting. Autosomal abnormalities involve differences in the number or structure of the autosome chromosome. Those are the pairs 1 through 22. The result from unequal distribution of the genetic material during gamete formation can cause things like Down syndrome, which is a genetic disorder caused when abnormal cell division results in an extra genetic material from chromosome 21. Down syndrome causes a distinct facial feature, intellectual disability, developmental delays, and may be associated with thyroid or heart disease. The most common trisomy abnormality in the U.S. is Down syndrome, and it happens in 1 out of every 691 births. If you look on page 129 under sex chromosome abnormalities, you need to read up on the Turner syndrome and Klinefelter syndrome, because you may see questions on this on your exams. So here we talk about the Turner syndrome is the most common deviation in females. It's also known as the monosomy X. Most end in miscarriage, but some are born and they have webbing of the neck, a low hairline or on the neck, low set ears, and lymphedema of the hands and feet. Cognitive levels actually vary in these children if they survive. Klinefelter syndrome or trisomy XXY is the most common in males. They are usually infertile, have poorly developed secondary sex characteristics, and small testes. They're usually tall and effeminate and may be slow to learn. Patterns of genetic transmission, unifactorial, you can see on pages 129 to 130. For more information about this, I don't have any questions on my test, usually about these things. Multifactorial, same thing. Things that will be discussed later in the chapter are a combination of environmental and genetic factors that cause things like cleft lip and palate, congenital heart disease, neural tubal defects, and pyloric stenosis. This is on page 131 in your book. It's a questionnaire for risk factors for genetic disorders. Genetic counseling is certainly warranted if you know that you have a family history on one side or the other of a genetic disorder. For instance, Tay-Sachs disease is a rare inherited disorder that progressively destroys nerve cells, neurons in the brain and spinal cord. And this disease is very rare to the general population, but the genetic mutations that cause this disease are more common in people of Jewish heritage. So if you are both Jewish and you may have family history of Tay-Sachs, you certainly want to have genetic counseling done before you conceive. This is a picture of gametogenesis and fertilization. Gametogenesis is the egg production, and then the sperm fertilizes the egg. It becomes a zygote. It combines the 23, well, you have 22 autosomes and one sex cell, which gives you 23 chromosomes. So the female has 23 chromosomes, the male has 23 chromosomes, and together they have 46, and they make a baby. On page 130, you'll see more information about these occurrence risk and recurrence risk. So the biggest role a nurse plays in being able to recognize that there might be a genetic problem with a newborn when we do our first admission on our newborn baby. But let me caution you not to be too hasty about calling someone that there might be a genetic problem until you see both of the parents, because the baby may just look like the mama or the daddy. So don't be too hasty to think that there's an obvious genetic problem just because they look funny, because some people look funny. Cell division, we've already talked about. Gametogenesis, we've talked about. Conception, we've talked about. And this is your sperm on the left and your egg on the right. Sperm and ovum and the different parts. Now when the sperm fertilizes the egg, after it's done swimming, the tail will drop off and it will penetrate the cell, and then cell division begins. This is just another picture here of the autosome and the sex cell. In humans, each cell normally contains 23 pairs of chromosomes. Gives you 46 total. 22 of these are the autosomes, and the 23rd one is your X or your Y. This is where fertilization is ideally supposed to take place. Fertilization should occur in the upper outer third of the fallopian tube, and then implantation should take place in the fundus of the uterus, or the top to the outside of where the fallopian tube enters the uterus. The higher it implants outside of the fallopian tube, the better, because then the placenta can implant into any part of the wall or lining of the uterus without fear of it being over the cervix. This just shows the fertilized egg, now being called a blastocyst, how it implants in the endometrial lining of the uterus. This slide has information that's more biological that I don't have any quiz questions on, so you can remember it or not remember it. I don't think you're going to see this on HESI. Then we have the primary germ layers, which is your ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. The amniotic fluid contains a constant temperature for the growing fetus. It serves as an oral fluid and repository for waste products. It cushions the fetus from trauma and allows freedom of movement in the musculoskeletal development. It serves as a barrier to infection and allows fetal lung maturity. It also serves to prevent the embryo from tangling with the membranes, causing amniotic banding syndrome. Amniotic band syndrome is not genetic. It's extremely unlikely that ABS will affect a future pregnancy. To date, no prenatal factors have been associated with ABS. The primary event is a rupture of the amniotic membrane and its detachment from the chorion and amniotic fluid leaking through the tear, which is spontaneously or after trauma to the lower abdomen. As a result, the fetus can move digits or limbs through this tear and exit the abdominal or amniotic cavity. The outer surface of the amnion, and to a lesser degree the naked chorion, produce mesodermic fibrous strings which may entangle and entrap different fetal organs, leading to constriction and amputation anomalies. These deductions agree with the increased frequency of constriction bands located more distally on the digits, hands, and feet, as well as on the varying severity of constrictions, ranging from slight grooves in the skin to actual amputation of the digit or limb. However, this theory does not explain the association of amniotic bands with damage to internal organs and other severe anomalies. This picture shows where some amniotic banding took place that caused deep grooves in the baby's foot and ankle area and actually amputated the tip of one of his toes. You can see the next picture shows it's wrapped around the baby's fingers. And then in the third picture, my question is, what would happen if it wrapped around the umbilical cord? That would be a game over kind of thing, I'm sure. So the amniotic fluid we talked about, the yolk sac becomes the primitive digestive system, and the umbilical cord supplies the embryo with maternal nutrients and oxygen. This is a picture of your placenta. It's on page 137 in your book. The meaty side at the top is called the dirty Duncan, and that's actually the verbiage they use for it, the dirty Duncan side, and that's the side that is attached to the uterine wall. The second picture, B, is what they call the shiny Schultz side, and this is the membrane that faces the fetus, the side that the umbilical cord is attached to. And in the third picture, they're actually examining the membrane and the whole placenta, and what they're looking for is pieces that might be missing, like definitive chunks that were left inside attached to the uterine wall that can cause infection and postpartum hemorrhage. So the placenta serves as an endocrine gland for the mother during pregnancy. And there are 4 hormones produced, and you need to know these. The 4 hormones are human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, human placental lactogen, HPL, estrogen, and progesterone. I need you to remember, do not forget, that progesterone is the hormone that maintains the pregnancy, because that's the hormone that maintains the endometrial lining. If the endometrial lining starts to shed, then there goes the baby. So it decreases contractility of the uterus and stimulates maternal metabolism and breast development in the alveoli. So progesterone is very important to remember. On page 139 through 140, you'll see all about the fetal circulation. Fetal circulation is actually opposite of the living, breathing human being. The fetus does not need oxygen in the lungs to survive, so oxygen is bypassed. The lungs are not breathing while in utero. The fetus carries oxygen in their veins and unoxygenated blood in their arteries, so that is opposite of what we have. After birth, the lungs empty of fluid and fill with air, causing mechanisms in the heart to close and reroute blood through the lungs, which switches the oxygenated blood to flow through the infant's arteries. So just remember that oxygenated blood in the fetus is actually in the veins, and unoxygenated blood is in the arteries. Fetal maturity or viability, according to studies Between 2003 and 2005, 20 to 35% of babies born at 23 weeks gestation survived. That's amazing. 50 to 70% of babies born at 24 to 25 weeks survived, and more than 90% born at 26 to 27 weeks survived. It is rare for a baby weighing less than 500 grams, that's 1 pound 6 ounces, to survive outside of the uterus. Your fetal circulatory system, the fetal heart rate, in utero should be 110 to 160 beats per minute. This is a picture of a baby boy with an imperforate anus. There is no rectal opening. This could be a simple procedure to fix, or it could cost him a very long recovery if they can even fix it. He may end up with an ostomy. Depending on how much is missing, if it's just a rectal opening, that's so simply making a rectal opening with a temporary ostomy, and then a reanastomosis at a certain point when the rectum has healed, or a very complicated procedure, especially if part of the intestine is missing as well. In the respiratory system, artificial surfactants may need to be given in a premature infant that's missing the surfactant. Surfactant is what causes the lungs to be able to expand and be more elasticized. In a very, very premature infant, their lungs are very sticky. Everything having to do with them is very sticky and gelatinous. So if a premature or micropreemie is born, they will not be able to breathe on their own without assistance from a ventilator. But it will not be able to ventilate them unless we give them some surfactant. The name of the surfactant that's artificial that we give them is called Survanta, S-U-R-V-A-N-T-A. There are other names for that as well if you want to choose to look those up, but Survanta is the most commonly known one. When a baby is born, the gastrointestinal system is sterile. It hasn't been exposed to anything to make it non-sterile. So vitamin K is given to the newborn because coagulation factors 2, 7, and 10 cannot be synthesized in the liver because the gut is sterile. This condition is present for several days after birth, and that's why we give the vitamin K as soon as the baby is born. It's given as an IM injection to the vastus lateralis muscle in their leg. This is a picture of dizygotic twins. There's 2 eggs, 2 implants, 2 placentas, and these babies are not identical. They're fraternal twins. The fetus responds to sound by 24 weeks. Hearing is fully developed by birth. By the 5th month in utero, a fetus can distinguish sweet from sour. When sweetener is added to the amniotic fluid, the infant swallows faster. The fetus can see bright light through the abdomen, and it disturbs their REM sleep if you don't keep your belly covered from bright light. So bikini sunbathing is probably not a good idea. Multifetal pregnancy. The incidence of twins is 1 in 43 pregnancies. The dizygotic twin happens when 2 mature ova are produced in one ovarian cycle, and each has the potential to be fertilized by a different sperm. There will be these babies will be identical, but rather they're called fraternal twins. Monozygotic twins develop from one fertilized ovum, and they will be identical. Conjoined twins are a type of a monozygotic twin in which there is an incomplete embryonic division. They can be joined at any area of the body, and they may share organs. This is a picture of a placenta from fraternal twins. Two different ova fertilized by two different sperm. May be the same sex or different, but they're no more alike than regular siblings. And this is the making of identical or monozygotic twins. They will be the same sex and have the same genotype. Comes from one fertilized ovum that divides, and they may share the same amniotic sac or be in separate sacs. They may have one placenta or two, and they may have two placentas that are fused or just share one. Page 148, this chart shows you the critical periods of development in the fetus. A teratogen. Teratogen is any agent that can disturb the development of an embryo or fetus. Teratogens may cause birth defects in a child or may halt the pregnancy outright. The classes of teratogen include radiation, maternal infections, chemical and drugs, and remember that amniotic bands are not considered a teratogen because it's produced in the environment of the baby itself. Your question for this chapter says a woman is 8 months pregnant. She tells the nurse that she knows her baby listens to her, but her husband thinks she's imagining things. The most appropriate response by the nurse is A. Many women imagine what their baby is like. B. Babies in utero do respond to their mother's voice. C. You'll need to ask the doctor if the baby can hear yet. Or D. Thinking that your baby hears will help you bond with the baby. Which one of these answers is correct? It is B, if that's the one you picked. Fetuses do respond to sound by 24 weeks. The fetus can be soothed by the sound of the mother's voice.